Light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved ever be. Welcome, I'm Sister Who. Today I wanted to offer a few thoughts on, well, I don't know if there's a proper way to title it. I suppose what one might call overlapping lives. One of the things that makes us human, I suppose, and I'm trying to think if I've heard of it other places other than in one particular movie, but within a particular episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, Captain Picard made the comment that one of the things with which we have to contend is that our time in this universe is finite. It's not endless. It's not. This body is not immortal. Our spirit and our consciousness may be immortal, but our body is not. And there's only a limited amount of time we have to do whatever it is we're going to do within whatever body we have. And essentially to take the opportunity of life and to make the best of it. The other movie that comes to mind was made many years ago. It's called Bicentennial Man, starring Robin Williams. And it was interesting in the way that movie was written, that it's essentially the story, the 200-year story of a robot becoming fully human within an advanced time where artificial organs of all sorts, artificial skin, artificial everything could be created. And the more he engineers artificial organs for himself and others to have, the more difficult it becomes to distinguish between the robot he originally was and a human being. And to the end where he, because I think it was because of legal distinctions that robots couldn't marry humans or vice versa. And so in order to marry the woman whom he'd come to love, in spite of having been originally created a robot, he had to become fully human in order for the two of them to be legally married. And the characteristic that the government of the world, I guess, or of humanity at that point, they heard his petition to be declared fully human, and they refused to grant it until, after much deliberation, he had given himself a circulatory system also, and so he had blood flowing through his body. And at that point he began to grow old and was in danger of dying. And it was the growing old and dying part that finally convinced the government to acknowledge him as fully human. And so there's this challenge that our time in these physical bodies is designed, intended, engineered, orchestrated, whatever, to be finite, to be limited. When I was in high school, there was a lot of discussion I was hearing of people who wanted to treat aging as if it were another disease and see if they could get to the point where we could essentially stop the body from aging, and people would then at that point have the ability to live for as long as they wanted to, I guess, more or less indefinitely, or at least for much more extended periods of time. To some extent, I don't disagree with prolonging life if it can be prolonged with sufficient quality. But I think we do lose part of our humanity if we ever get to the point of not remembering and not understanding that our time in this universe is finite, that life is limited, and that every elderly person I've met, at least, looks back at their life and says, it all went by so quickly. Life is too short. There was one retired school teacher for whom I did lots of odd jobs and such, who remarked to me in one of her last letters, "Life is short, eat dessert first." And in some ways, I suppose I've done a little bit of that, but hopefully there's even better things yet to come for me. But one of the things of which I'm aware every day, and it's not because I'm some morbid person dwelling on the prospect of death all the time, but rather, to remember that there will come a time when I'm gone, and I will have done all the good I can do. And I sincerely hope that by that time I will have left a body of work behind to outlive me that is genuinely helpful to a lot of people. I like to think that the shows I've made and the conversations I've had with people have been genuinely helpful, and that in a sense whenever I finally leave this life, that I will be leaving the world a better place than I found it, at least insofar as my contribution is concerned. I don't know whether the world will be better than it was when I was born, because of whatever situations of war or conflict or societal upheaval or famine or pestilence or whatever disease may be happening at the time, I don't know. But insofar as what I contributed, to know that I did what I could to leave the world a better place than I found it. That I didn't simply arrive and soak up all the resources I could, have a party that was doomed to end, and then I'm gone, and within a few short years nobody remembers that I was ever here. I'm afraid that's the case for an awful lot of people. That when we live our lives as if all that matters is our own enjoyment, when we live when we fail to live, in pondering this point many, many times, it occurred to me that when we fail to live for something bigger than ourselves, our lives become small and petty and unimportant. And when we live for something bigger than ourselves, when we live for artistic development, linguistic development, international communication, building relationships, raising children who have wisdom and love and understanding and confidence to address whatever challenges the future holds. There's a sort of immortality in that, and yet it's not that it has to be me going on forever. It doesn't have to have my name on it, but simply to be able to die with the knowledge that I did contribute something good, that I did well in some small way, that I didn't spend all of it being selfish and being small-minded, but that I developed a breadth of understanding and a breadth of perception that made life worth living, even when the circumstances weren't all that rewarding or impressive. There's a common saying that no good deed goes unpunished, because of how often people have done something good and thereafter experience some sort of misfortune, trying to help someone and having it thrown back in their faces, but I didn't want it. Not that the other person should have been dishonest, but that, perhaps a better example is the person who stops to help someone who appears to have a flat tire along the highway, and says, do you need help changing that tire? And it turns out that the whole thing was a ruse, and the person, gets robbed, possibly murdered, and the person who was supposedly in trouble drives off in a car that's perfectly fine, having taken the person's wealth and possibly health. And hence this saying, no good deed goes unpunished. Kind of a cynical comment on the way our society has evolved. But it doesn't have to stay that way, and it doesn't always turn out that way. Certainly there's a reasonable concern for personal safety that should be remembered. If you're going to stop to help someone, if it's after dark, take someone with you. Don't stop to help someone all by yourself. If you're even going to do that situation, or perhaps better yet, find a telephone somewhere and call and report there's someone who is having car trouble at mile marker number whatever, along highway number whatever. You know, do what you can to contribute to that person getting the help they need if it's a legitimate help. And if it's not, of course, by reporting it, there may be a police officer or an official or somebody with more resources who will stop by to see whether the circumstance is what it appears to be. In any case, I'm kind of rambling off the subject, I suppose, but it's what I'm thinking about in all of this, I guess, is the ways that I received something from those who came before me. I added something of my own, and I will leave something for those who come after me. That humanity and human history is about overlapping lives, each person getting a turn at bat, so to speak, to do whatever they can to add to the score of the game, if that's a helpful metaphor for you. I don't think of life so much as a game as of a place in which the human soul can grow and develop. But to keep eyes and ears open so that even the person who, whether due to difference or age difference, someone who's just different or someone who's significantly older, to consider them a treasure chest, a container of undiscovered treasures, that there are things they have been through in their life, challenges with which they wrestled, questions they didn't answer, but the ways they wrestled with those questions may be insightful. You know, how did you deal with parents wanting you to be something that you didn't want to be? That's happened in every single generation of humanity back to the beginning. It's not, there's so many challenges that are not unique to the current generation. And by learning how people dealt with them in other times and places, it may give us some wonderful ideas for how to deal with them in our own time and place. In any case, one of the inspirational people in my life was an elderly school teacher for whom I did odd jobs, and there was, in the abundance of experience she'd accumulated, there was a sort of wisdom that emerged in a very subtle, quiet way. And I never heard her say the chorus to a song I'd like to share with you today, but it was kind of the understanding I developed by talking with her and numerous other elderly people with whom I interacted, with whom I visited and spoke and discussed lots of even very complex ideas when I was in my early and later teenage years, and even my early adult years, as I got into my early 20s. In contemplating how in the dailiness of life and these seemingly simple activities, there was a kind of ongoing thread of life woven, a sort of continuity, a sort of connection, a way that all the pieces fit together, like bricks stacked together into a giant pyramid, that it built something bigger than any one of us, by each of us contributing our part to the larger work. And yet, in becoming aware of that larger work, not to find ourselves neglecting the dailiness of life and the simple little moments where maybe all you have to do is get someone to smile, get someone to laugh just for a moment, not to forget their troubles, not to run away from their troubles, but to understand that the troubles and the difficulties and the struggles are not all there is, that there is both the good and the bad in everything, that when the moment feels heavy, there's still something that can make you giggle. And when the moment is perhaps almost too euphoric and happy and light, so that we forget our roots and our groundedness, and what difference does this really make? In the case of this, two different examples come to mind. One is the elderly school teacher putting flowers by various gravestones in the cemetery. It was a ritual that she did several times a year to make sure that things were always taken care of, that the people whom she had known were fondly remembered and honored in their memory by having fresh flowers by their gravestones. Another elderly gentleman was a retired doctor who had a beautiful garden in his backyard, but he had become elderly and even had difficulty with stairs, so that he had a chairlift installed in his house and so forth. And the garden had totally grown over. And through a friend of his, I guess, I'm not quite sure how he got my name, he called me up and said that he was interested in someone coming to do yard work and odd jobs for him and such. And I guess I've always had a knack for house plants and tending to gardens and so forth, so he showed me where the project was, and he walked out the next day and was just totally amazed at the transformation, because I had found there were paving stones. There was actually a stone walkway underneath the turf, and so I cut the grass back, and so for the first time in 20 years he could see the stone walkway through his garden again, and all the weeds had been cleaned out, and the flowers were blooming beautifully, and it was as if the whole garden had woken up again. And you know, to me, of course, it was like all I did was weed. Wasn't any big thing, but it transformed a whole part of his home and allowed him to enjoy life again and to remember beauty again that he hadn't seen in quite a long time. In any case, I suppose one of the wondrous things about life is that there's so much going on, and it's so easy to miss, and consequently how very important it becomes to really listen to each other and to take time for each other and to continue to communicate, even especially when there is an overabundance of distractions. In trying to picture all these fond memories and put them together into some sort of coherent message that I could take with me through all the futures of my life, remembering these two people and others who inspired me. My own grandmother, who came from East Prussia as a very young girl, and I remember seeing her passport picture once, and I don't know that I'll ever see it again because I'm estranged from my family, but first time I saw her original passport picture, I just looked at the face and said, wow. It was an old sepia tone picture, and I said, this is a passport photo? Because usually we think of passport photos and driver's license photos as being these basic representations that aren't all that attractive. This was about a 4x5 sepia or brown tone picture of this young woman with auburn hair and this resolute look on her face, and it was as if she had fire in her eyes. There was just such a resolve and a spirit to her. And yeah, my grandmother was one of my greatest inspirations. I don't know that she and I ever accomplished the honest relationship I really wanted with her, because she, in her later years, she got so much into trying to please others and keep everything looking correct as far as the small town environment was concerned. But in her early years, she was a force to be reckoned with. She moved from East Prussia to the United States as a young girl, making the trip all by herself, married a man after she arrived here, had a succession of careers long before women were expected to be working outside the home. When my grandfather died, she took some inheritance money, and she and another friend, and they basically built a motel from the ground up and ran it for 20 years before she finally retired from that. She was just an amazing, powerful person, and yet this very small woman, not very tall at all. And yet if she set her mind to something, she made it happen. And in so many ways she continues to be this inspiration for me, even though our relationship was not what I wished it was. Still, I will never forget the look in her eyes in her first passport photo. This fiercely determined, strong young woman from East Prussia. And in any case, the song I wrote in memory of all these wonderful people and the timeless sorts of homes they created, that visiting them was like taking a step back through time. The light from the window on the faded old chair caused her blue eyes to sparkle like the age wasn't there. I quietly listened. I tried to remember each story she told me, each moment we shared. Each day is a present to live and to be, just like Christmas morning, she'd say to me, make lots of memories and a good world to live in. Remember to listen. And one more thing she'd say. Though nobody hears me, and they don't understand that tomorrow is yesterday, still here in our hands. Let's cherish this moment now as it slips away. So when you are lonely, remember today. The flowers we planted, trimming bushes and trees, the seasonal changes accepted with ease, her loving example, her interest in my dreams, her continuous learning, I remember all these. I was in college, so far away, yet one of her letters could brighten my day. In summer we'd still go to the old cemetery, placing flowers by gravestones of friends passed away. Though nobody hears me, and they don't understand that tomorrow is yesterday, still here in our hands. Let's cherish this moment now as it slips away. So when you are lonely, remember today. Her inspiration, like the light in her eyes, lingered close by me as a help and a guide. When the world gets confusing and too much is changing, I recall her example and just let it all be. It was years later I finally learned my teacher was gone too, and so I returned in the cold of the winter to the old cemetery, place to visit a gravestone of a friend passed away. Though nobody hears me, and they don't understand that tomorrow is yesterday, still here in our hands. Let's cherish this moment now as it slips away. So when you are lonely, remember today.